Man, making content is hard. How do I think big and come up with new ideas every day? It was hard until today, because I'm going to run you through 13 content rituals, not just idea rituals, things that you can do every single week to take the stress and work out of having to come up with fresh ideas. Gang, that's not the move. You got to develop your formats and keep chugging on that format over and over again. It makes the content game way easier. I'm going to give you 13 rituals you can swipe from my top secret Omega clearance level personal content Rolodex. Okay? I'm looking at them right now, boys. They're good. You're not going to want to miss this. Come on in. It's Jason Daly. Previously on Jason Daly, rituals are what you want to build your content around. If you're writing an email newsletter, like having to summon the brain cells to come up with a new fresh idea every single time, that's just not the move, buddy. You want to have rituals that's like recurring formats that you can use over and over again to keep putting your expertise out there into the ether. Don't worry about repeating yourself. You're the only one that's seeing every little thing that you do. The goal with content is to be consistent, to be visible, and rituals make this much easier because it makes it way lower lift. Whether it's a social media post, whether it's a YouTube video, whether it is a newsletter. On the podcast right now, every Friday is a Q&A. Every Tuesday is a Roast My Firm. We've cycled various rituals in and out. The ones that people like stick around. When I get bored of them, we do something new. But it makes a big difference in the amount of effort that's required to put that content together. So without further ado, I said 13 just because it looked good in the title. There's actually more than 13, but I don't know that every single one of them count as whole numbers. Don't worry about the numbers. All right, first up, just roasts. In general. There's something great about the framing of a roast because it's a little bit controversial by nature, right? They're like, ooh, somebody's gonna get roasted. I wanna see this. But it works in so many different contexts. We do Roast My Firm here, obviously, every Tuesday. And it is where people anonymously submit me details about their firm and I politely roast it. It's not even really a roast. Sometimes if there's brutal stuff in there, I'll be like, yeah, this is a bad idea. But it's mainly meant to be helpful. And the cool thing about roasts is it gives the consumer a moment to step out of their own reality and put the coach hat and be like, yeah, your stuff stinks. When many of the same things that they're doing wrong, you also do wrong. But to see the world through the lens of a coach that's not tied up in all of your kind of personal circumstances, that's really helpful. And actually, the more you do that, you find you have like a more clear perspective on your own bleep, which actually does stink. And so it's not only a fun format that is pretty good for engagement because people are like, what's this roast? It's actually really useful for the people that consume it as well. So we do Roast My Firm, Roast My Tech Stack. I've got a plan for a way that I'm going to be able to do that in the future that will be, I think, a fun format where I can give people feedback on the tech stack they have in their firm. Obviously, as accountants, that's going to be a popular one because people love geeking on their tech stacks and trying to figure out how to optimize that. Most of us are workflow junkies, so that's a fun one. But man, if you work with beekeepers, there's all sorts of stuff you could roast. Roast my vendor list, roast my accounts receivable, roast my chart of accounts, roast my financial statements. Oh, hang on. That's a really good one. Oh, roast my post. We've roasted people's social media content on here before. That's just a fun format, but find one that will appeal to a specific type of person. Even roast my financial statement is cool, but if you just think about analyzing a financial statement, this is a great example. With no context of what type of business it is and nothing to compare it to, roasting a financial statement, is it really that interesting? Besides like correcting accounting errors. You have $250,000 in opening balance equity. Is anybody gonna find that interesting? Probably not. But if I'm just doing it for beekeepers and I just look at beekeepers' financials every single week, I'm gonna know a lot more about what's normal and what's not normal. Likewise, the people consuming it just have a much more specific context to where anything I say about that's gonna be way more actionable for them than if I am roasting the financial statements of a car wash. Like, what are they gonna do with that information, right? So as with most things, get specific. There are really cool businesses to be built around like small followings. Like remember, if 5 people like your post, like that is 5 human beings on the other side, and probably 10 times as many that read it and didn't engage. You think about the size of your firm, the number of clients that you have, that's not a big number, especially if we could compare it to social media metrics. It doesn't take many meaningful connections to change your business. Okay, another one I'm hot on right now, another ritual, AI generated lists, like idea lists. And so the context in which I've used this, in fact, let me pull up the prompt just to be really specific here. You've probably seen me post about this before. Here's the prompt from ChatGPT. I'm an accounting and tax pro. Generate a list of 50 very specific micro niches I could support. For example, not e-commerce, but something specific like apparel printing e-com, or not retail, but bike retail, not plumbers, but plumbers for commercial medical buildings. Focus on niches that could be adjacent to one's personal interests, and focus on niches that are in growing industries. That's my ChatGPT prompt. And you almost feel bad asking it to do this because you would never ask a human to do this volume of work. You ask it and it's like, sure thing, boss. And it spews out a whole list of 50 different things. Mobile app developers for fitness coaches, virtual reality game studio, specialty coffee roasters and subscriptions, personal finance advisor for digital nomads. These are great, right? You can take it a step further and even define like the format of the output that you want to make it easily copy pastable to something else. In this case, I actually had a bit more in the prompt that said outline a compliance pane for each of them, an accounting pane for each of them, and an integration pane for each of them. So for example, for this personal finance advisor for digital nomads result that it gave, it said the compliance pane was understanding international tax laws and regulations affecting digital nomads, makes sense. For an accounting pane, managing and organizing personal finances across multiple currencies and countries. Yeah, wow, that's a great one. And then integration pane, integrating various international financial accounts into a single management tool for comprehensive advisory. Wow, that is good. It gave me 50 of those. So where that's useful for my audience, small firm owners, is to just always be ideating about, oh, I could actually get a lot more specific than I am right now. And when you get specific, it's actually really interesting. Like I'm not like closing the door on other interesting opportunities by going specific. There's actually a lot of interesting things to be found by going specific. And so this ritual, all it is using AI to generate a big old list. Now, it has to be something that is like interesting or useful to your audience. But then the one thing, like the one step further I go then is I call out my favorite one in that list. And that's where in the past summer camps and private air charter, we did podcast episodes on those. That's where those have come from. And I'll do a little bit of a deeper dive on that one where I say, here's how you could build this niche from scratch. And so I like throw out a bunch of ideas for networking opportunities and how to get content in front of these people, associations that you could become a member of to sponsor things, live events that you could go to. And so I pick out my favorite one from that list and I go deep on that one. And that's a killer format because I literally just have to hit generate. The machine goes burr and I've got another list of 50. I actually think that's a much more interesting use of AI for ideation and then commentary on those ideas. I think that's a much more interesting use of AI than like generating your writing, which it generally won't do all that well. So what's a version of that that could work for the type of folks that you're talking to? Today's episode is sponsored in part by LiveFlow, the company that puts a wee little button in your Excel, in your Google Sheets, that lets you connect any old QuickBooks file to your spreadsheets. How would you use this? Having all that QuickBooks data at hand anytime you're in a spreadsheet? One way, buddy, month-end closes. Hear me out. You can build out a template that is any number of sheets in a workbook. If this workbook is your month-end close, that could be a collection of 30 different worksheets that are all pointing to different reports inside of a QuickBooks file. You build this thing out over time, and to set that up for the next month-end close, the click of a button. All that stuff loads in immediately for the next month. Think about how much work it is to run those work papers manually, but you set up that template, month over month, you pull it in immediately, you got a ton of information all in a single place, right? I bumped into a few folks in the wild now that have switched to using LiveFlow for managing month-end closes. Super interesting use case. They do a bunch of other things, but it just goes to show you having all that data handy in a spreadsheet, that's really nice, right? That is LiveFlow. Put a link in the show notes. if you want to learn more. This episode is brought to you in part by TeamUp, helping you recruit top Filipino accountants without any ongoing monthly fees. The difference between TeamUp and all the other offshoring options is that TeamUp helps you hire staff directly. No middleman. You work directly with your new hire in the Philippines. Hire the person, not the company. Guys, gals, gang, here's just a few reasons to hire directly. You have access to higher level talent. Makes sense. You have complete control over team culture and training. They keep 100% of what you pay them, and it's a lot more affordable for you, so you can retain your team for the long term. TeamUp can source accountants with experience working at US or Australian firms, familiar with tools like Xero, QBO, and Dex. Also recruit specialist roles, team leaders, tax specialists, administrative assistants. Thought experiment. What if you had an executive assistant for the first time this tax season? Just throwing it out there. What would they do? Start at that email video I did on the main channel recently. Get help with that stanky old inbox. I digress. TeamUp recruits these talented folks for a flat one-time fee of 4,000 US American dollars. That's it, 4K one time. Somebody at Robert Half just did a spit take. Robert Half reference. We ever gonna get Robert Half to sponsor this pod? Not anymore. And they can connect you with an affordable employer of record if you need help with payroll and compliance once you hire that person. Big fan of hiring in the Philippines. You know I did a bunch of that. Check out the link in the description to learn more about TeamUp. All right, next up, tell a person's story. Man, this is something that I'm trying to do more of because I sit here and shout at people all day and tell you what to do. But my conviction comes from hearing the stories of others. That's where it all started. It didn't start from someone telling me what to do. Usually it started from me hearing stories. And then when you start hearing the same themes over and over again, you reach this critical mass where you're like, well, this seems like something that people are onto. There's something to this. And eventually you become convicted that this is an interesting thing, and then you tell people about it. But the frustrating thing is you tell people about it and they don't have all the same context that you do, so they're not going to immediately be as excited as you are about that thing. See every single time you took a good idea back to your team, right? Why are you convinced that that's the way to do it? Well, it's a whole bunch of context that you have. Maybe it's 50 freaking videos you watched of mine that you're like, yeah, this is the way to do it, man. This is the best. Meanwhile, your colleague just goes home and watches PBS every night, and they're like, nothing that you're saying is making sense to me. I'm sorry. I just don't understand. But then we blame them. What are you not getting? It's like, I truly believe we are programmed by the things that we consume, which is why we have to be really careful about curating our information diets and what things are flying at us all the time. We genuinely are a product of the stuff that we consume. As much as I'd like to pretend there's a barrier there that's no, I'm holding back the bad stuff. To a degree, it's true. We're programmed by that stuff. And if you've consumed a totally different set of things than the rest of your team, then it's hard to blame them when they don't have all that context, right? They're not going to see the world the same way that you do. What's the quote? By the way, this is a great ChatGPT use case. Just remembering things. What's that quote that's something along the lines of, if the other person had the same experience you'd know, if you had the same experience they did, you'd probably feel the same way? Classic ChatGPT. If you could understand everything I understood, you would make the same choices I make. ChatGPT is very good at making sense of your just raw. I mean, you heard that sentence that I just said. I feel bad just making you listen to it, but ChatGPT actually turned that into a clear answer. Anyways, your colleagues don't have that point of view because they haven't consumed the same things that you have. By and large, two human beings, if we're run through the same circumstances, exposed to the same things, we'll end up in a pretty similar place. It's actually a good way to kind of reverse engineer the change you want people to kind of try to make. But I've been trying to do more storytelling because I actually think that can be more convincing than me saying, here's how to do this thing. And the good news is, when it comes to content, stories, as far as engagement goes, they're super compelling. If they're interesting stories, and if they're stories that are very relevant to you. Go back to when you didn't know other firm owners, and maybe you still don't. But I now have a relationship with a whole bunch of other firm owners, but I still remember the first time I sat down and talked with someone else who owned a firm. And it was like, bro, you get it, man. You get it. We are so vibing. Like, that was such a novel thing to finally talk with someone else that does what I do who isn't in my firm. Had somebody been putting out stories from firm owners there, and the reality is there were podcasts, stuff like that. I just wasn't plugged into that universe yet. For those stories to be out there, that was gold. Like, I would have been so into that. And the same goes for your beekeeping clients. Particularly if it's so specific that nobody's having those conversations yet. If you create the first space for it where people are sharing their stories, man, the other people in that space are going to eat it up. And that's not even you having to do the work of creating or ideating that content. That's just you creating a platform for other people to share their journey. That's super cool, right? And is a bottomless source of cool stuff. Like if your network is growing and you're able to capture these stories, that is a great recurring format to keep coming back to. A format I've been exploring this week in my ChatGPT. Why that format is interesting to me, common thing you see from accountants, how do I actually use ChatGPT? Like, what would I even use it for? And I'm like, man, that's actually kind of a hard question to answer. I just know that I use it all the time. And so I've been thinking like maybe every week or maybe in my newsletter or something like that, I literally just dump, here's my ChatGPT history. So most recent thing I have in my ChatGPT, what's that quote that's something along the lines of if everybody or if the other person had the same experience, you'd know if you had the same experience they did, you'd probably feel the same way. So the reason I haven't done this yet is I'm actually pretty embarrassed. The next thing in my history is a really embarrassing thing that's in an upcoming podcast episode that I won't spoil yet. Next is calculating the towing capacity of a Honda Odyssey with a specific U-Haul trailer and how much I can put inside of the Odyssey. Boy. After that, can I use my 8 Sleep pod cover? I could do a whole episode on that. Can I use that mattress cover with an adjustable bed base? You know, the ones that like fold up, like you would see the commercials when you were younger and that you had the old people sitting up watching TV. If you grew up around when I did, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Well, I've got this fancy mattress topper. Can you just indulge me for 30 seconds, okay? So if you haven't seen it, the 8 Sleep pod cover, it is a mattress cover that pumps water through that mattress cover. So you're laying on top of this mattress cover on your mattress, and this water can be cooled to 50 degrees or heated to like 90 degrees or something like that. As you've probably already guessed, I'm a sweaty boy, okay? I'm feeling so much regret about this rabbit hole. I used to wake up in a flop sweat like several times a night. And for some reason at one point, it just got really bad where I was waking up like time and time again. I'd be cold as heck when I go to bed, so I bundle all up. And then I wake up 3 hours later and I'm like, everybody out of bed, gotta change all the sheets because I got all sweaty. Okay, this mattress cover changed my life because it will dynamically cool and heat according to the body temperature that it detects. So it's literally impossible to ever wake up from being too hot or from being too cold. You want to talk about a life hack? This thing is not cheap. I mean, it's not like astronomical. I think it's like $1,500 or something like that. The 8 Sleep mattress cover, was genuinely life-changing to me. Anyways, so I asked ChatGPT, can I like lift the bed and like raise the head part or the feet part if I have this cover on it? Or am I gonna have a blowout and water's gonna go shooting all over the place? Turns out it's fine. If anybody's still listening to this, I'm gonna get back to that ritual was this week in my ChatGPT. The goal of that would be to show like, how do I use it day in and day out? I don't know if that'll be a helpful format or if that'll just make people dumber, seeing my ChatGPT history. Okay, up next. Basically repurposing other people's content. So this was all the rage on social media maybe 3 years ago. People just summarizing the heck out of things. Oh, now you don't have to read this book or listen to that podcast or whatever. Here are all of my takeaways. And we all got super sick of it, but there's a version of that that's still really, really useful when you do it through a very particular lens. So, you know, what the 4-hour work week means to me, I'm talking about the Tim Ferriss book, for small accounting firms. Like there's a version of this where I do this on the podcast. This is a format I come back to quite a bit, where I'll go through a book and like share my learnings from that book, particularly as they apply to the very specific things that we do. The general version of this, man, it's not interesting. The very specific version of this is actually really cool, particularly if you're one of the only people talking about it in that space. So what does, the 4-hour work week mean for beekeepers? How should that impact how we think about running a beekeeping business? That's actually really interesting stuff. And I actually really enjoy developing that content because I'm investing in myself by reading that, by consuming that thing. And in my head, I really am thinking like, what does that mean for beekeepers? What does that mean for small firm owners? And then I can put that stuff back out to try to help somebody. That's probably the most fun content for me to make. In fact, I've daydreamed if ever I killed this podcast or just stopped doing all my content and did something different, it would probably be something around books, because that just feels so sustainable. Like I love reading. It just feels like a great investment in myself. And so if I could piggyback content on that thing that I love, that'd be a lot of fun. So this is like an especially fun format to go back to. But you can do this for books. You can do it for podcast episodes. You can do it for like a live talk you saw in person. You can do it for current events. Pretty much, any other people's content. Look at, mainstream people's content. I brought up Alex Hormozi before, Tim Ferriss, all sorts of internet think people. Think of if there's a way to take that general content and put it through a very specific lens for people. That's a great ritual to keep coming back to because it's also an investment in yourself. This episode is sponsored in part by Cloud Accountant Staffing. I got another resume for you, an example of the super talented accountants in the Philippines that Cloud Accountant Staffing will find for you, bring to you to become valuable members of your team. How about a tax hire? Let's do a tax person today. This one's a CPA and a certified tax technician. That's actually a Philippines thing. Got their start in audit and you went to tax. Good for you, as you should have. 2 years of experience doing tax work for U.S. individuals and companies. Prepared 1040s, 1065s, 1120s, and 1120s. Fixed assets, communicated directly with clients to gather information. Conducted independent research on applicable tax stuff as needed. Experience with ProConnect Tax, RC reports, Corvi tax planning. Just a few years removed from school. Man, this is the type of person where I would try to sink my teeth into him super early. The hires we made in the Philippines were so good, like so capable. We had great luck with it. The way Cloud Accountant Staffing works, they have a call with you, talk about your needs, and then their recruiters on the ground in the Philippines will go find great applicants for your role. You decide if you want to interview them, and you only pay anything when you actually hire somebody. It is like win-win. You kind of don't have anything to lose because you're only going to cut a check when you've found somebody that you've fallen in love with, that you want to be part of your team. To learn more about Cloud Accountant Staffing and get some like real life resumes like this, check out the link in the show notes. This episode is sponsored in part by Uncat, my 2021 new tool of the year. Man, it has just gotten better since then. We recently did a 5-minute demo of the latest cool new Uncat features on my YouTube channel. If you're not familiar with Uncat, it handles the uncategorized transaction problem. So basically you point Uncat at any set of accounts in the client's chart of accounts. Anytime any transaction hits those accounts, like Ask My Accountant, Uncategorized, that sort of thing, it gets pulled into Uncat, and then on a notification schedule that you choose, like once a week, your client gets an email notification. It says, I need you to provide some clarification on these transactions. They click a magic link in that email, don't have to log in or anything like that. It takes them straight into Uncat, and they provide whatever details you need. Now, you can ask them to just give you a text description. You can ask them to try to pick what account it ought to go into, to upload a receipt, to pick a class, to pick a location, and you can make any of those things mandatory. So just imagine if you set up some bank rules that put stuff like Amazon transactions, sets them to automatically classified uncategorized. You could touch that client's books once a quarter, and every single week your client's gonna be getting notified of the transactions you need more info of without you even having to get into the accounting file. But wait, there's more. You can add as many client users to a company as you want. Let's say you got 5 people at the clients that have their own credit cards and you got to track all that stuff down every month. You can set all of the transactions specific to payment methods to go to specific users. What? They recently rolled out custom requests. So you can actually ask for any old thing, questions, documents, whatever, via that same Uncat experience. And they recently rolled out receipts. They will auto-match receipts to transactions that are in the accounting ledger. So the client emails a receipt in, uploads one to Uncat, SMS messages a receipt in, and Uncat will find the transaction that's associated with in the ledger. All you gotta do is confirm the match, and it'll actually push that receipt into QuickBooks, Xero, whatever you're using. Super cool tool and easy to start with a single client. Like doesn't require changing a whole practice management system or something. You've actually got a free 7-day trial. You don't even have to give them your card. You go to uncat.com, check that one out. Take it for a spin with your firm even to get comfortable with it. Really cool tool. That's Uncat, UNCAT, like a kitty. This is a fun one, red flags. I've thought about doing red flag Fridays. One of the biggest YouTube videos I've ever had was a collab I did with Logan Graff, where we go back and forth and kind of act out like common client onboarding red flags, where they say something during the sales process like, my last guy wasn't creative enough. Or, stuff like that, where we've all heard it before and you're like, oh, yikes, look out. Every business has some version of this. I mean, there's so many of these, and even how people talk about their accounting firms. A family atmosphere. Oh, that means that I can make unreasonable requests of you at the expense of your actual family. Stuff like that, where you're like, oh, buddy, the partner track, where you're like, oh, been there, bought the t-shirt, know what that actually means. Red flags. And that content's actually great, because when someone else reads it and they're like, oh my gosh, yes, me too, like somebody gets it, they're super likely to engage. The more likely people are to engage, the more that post gets shown to other folks like that person that engaged. So like if that person is a beekeeper, when beekeepers super get this thing and they engage with it, it makes it really likely that that post is then presented to more beekeepers. And that's kind of the goal of what we're doing here. Next one, comic panels. Jonathan Stark does this. If you never read Jonathan Stark's stuff, he's really good. He's been posting actively on LinkedIn now. But he's got these like comic panels that he reuses that are like two people having a back and forth, and he just updates the text. And you could kind of combine this with the last one, even like common red flag interactions. But it's a funny way of illustrating like common back and forths. Something similar to this that I've done on Twitter is like my legacy accountant operators manual that I've made, where it's all these legacy accountantisms, like I don't want to let people work remotely because I don't want them to steal time. And I'm like, what makes you think the people in the office aren't stealing time? Or it was, if they're going to steal time from you working remotely, I guarantee they're already stealing time from you in the office. Stuff like that, where like, if you get what this community deals with, it's kind of like the red flags thing where they're like, oh yeah, somebody gets it. I'm gonna like this. I'm gonna drop a comment. And it doesn't even have to be useful. You kind of have to avoid the trap of going too far down the entertainment path, because while entertainment can get engagement, it's really hard to build a business around. But for like what I do, I'll do entertainment stuff from time to time, and it can help you find new people. But then ultimately, like, you gotta land the plane with the valuable content. Two more here. Anonymous feedback on anything. What are you an expert on? What can you give feedback on? I guess this is kind of like a roast. What I was thinking was like people sending me screenshots of their video setup and being able to share ideas like change the framing here, move this prop there, reuse this thing that you already have in a different way to make it a little bit better. I guess that is pretty much like a roast, right? One thing you can enable here, Roast Affirm's a good example of this, is if it's something that could be sensitive where they wouldn't otherwise share it, and maybe they're not even able to talk about it with anybody, give them a form where they can make submissions anonymously, and it opens up a new type of conversation that people normally like don't have permission to have. And then when you do that in a public setting where anyone can speak into it and all that, obviously with permission, that creates a really unique kind of intimate space where you can share that in kind of an interesting way. Last one, Q&As, and you don't even have to have any Qs. You can make up the Qs. In fact, sometimes the best Q&As are the ones where you've seeded the questions that you actually want to answer. The next time you're in a webinar or at a live talk or anything like that and there's a Q&A, I almost guarantee you a number of those questions are plants. That's actually just the smart thing to do. If you've ever been in a situation where you get to the Q&A and everybody just sits there and nobody will be the first one to ask a question, and like, that is awful. You kind of got to have a backup plan to make sure that that doesn't happen. But Q&A is killer. Q&A is my favorite day. Q&A Fridays on the podcast, my favorite day of the week. It's the easiest day of the week too, because it's something that you're confident about. Like, we spend all day advising our clients. We can riff on that stuff absolutely no problem. So it's so in your wheelhouse because you already do it, to where it makes that content creation process so easy. If they're real questions from a specific type of person, that's great. If they're not, think about what are the questions maybe somebody should have asked to avoid this or that. Especially early on in your content journey where you may not have a bunch of inbound. Totally okay to make up, your own questions that you think are interesting. Also, as a social media format, Q&A usually does pretty well on engagement because people want to share their own A's, their own answers. They may disagree with you. They may have different perspective. And because you get that more likely chance that somebody will pop in their own answer, that boosts the engagement of the post and it'll generally perform better. We've been experimenting with shorts from the Friday Q&As where I frame up the question and then I answer it as potentially a good social media format to attract new folks to the podcast and just to the discussion in general. That's something, if you look around in our space right now, I'd argue, I don't know that anybody's really doing that, at least not in video format, like Q&As about small firm running. And all it takes is somebody like scrolling by the 10th one of those that they saw from you and they're like, okay, this one I actually have this problem, so I'll listen to what this guy has to say this time. And if there's a little bit of a nugget of like, oh, like that one bit, I didn't get the picture of the guy in the yellow sweater in the background. I super don't like his vibe and how funny he thinks he is. But he did say one thing there that I picked up on that like actually is valuable for me. And then maybe you get a follow and then they watch a couple other things. And that's how you start like building a relationship with somebody. Q&As are gold. If you're doing even like an email newsletter, Q&A is super valuable, like a bottomless source, particularly as in the process of running an accounting firm, you're getting questions all day, every day, right? So like redact those questions, save your favorites, answer them in a format where everyone can see that. That's really valuable. And you are like giving out value in a really high leverage way where it would otherwise require a one-on-one interaction. There you have it. If you're thinking about content, think about content in terms of rituals. Don't start with just random posting. Start with a ritual. If you have random things that come to your mind that are good posts, by all means, let her rip. But if you're looking for a place to start, decide on one ritual that you could post every single week, right? Now, maybe you can build other rituals into the other days of the week, but you got to start somewhere. And rituals are great because it doesn't require reinventing the wheel every single time you come to do it. There you go. Bunch of ideas from my little social database. Don't tell anybody about them. That's between you and me. I'll see you in the next one.